Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. Here's your host, Chris Lee. Commodore fans, on your feet. It's time to anchor down.
Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast presented by Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. We're part of the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Chip Fridrich. We'll talk Vanderbilt baseball. We ended up talking an hour and a half, which wasn't planned, but in any case, lots of good stuff in here. Everything from previewing the series with Tennessee to rewinding a pretty disastrous performance in a midweek loss to Indiana State to talking about equipment stuff. So we hope you'll enjoy today's edition of the show. Chip Fridrich joins me. It's a Wednesday morning. It's just been a weird week for Vanderbilt baseball. First of all, to start the weirdness, I want to say Vandy was 3 in D1's regional predictions last week, or make that Baseball Americas, and it's 5 this week after beating South Carolina 2-3 this weekend. So that one's a little hard to understand if I got my facts right there. Number 2, Vanderbilt takes the biggest series of the year that it's played so far, but frankly, the past 4 games, 2 have been a disaster. With 2 wins in between that, during which Vanderbilt did it pitching shorthanded against a team you don't want to be shorthanded in pitching against. Let's start there. How do you make sense of the last week, and where's this headed?
Well, last night was when we're talking about the Indiana State. That was a scheduled loss, Chris. That was a scheduled loss.
Right.
Vanderbilt, we do that, right?
There was only a 5.8% chance they were going to win. So.
Anyway, last night was strange in a lot of ways. Indiana State came in here hungry. They've lost to Vanderbilt numerous times. They've been here. They're a good team. I think they're probably projected to be in the tournament. I don't see them, they're always kind of seem to be hanging around there. They've always been a good program. It was a nutty night in the league. You saw UAB beat Alabama 4-3. Missouri had to scratch and claw to beat Missouri State. They came back and won. Georgia beat Clemson, which was kind of a shock there. You had LSU losing, the number 1 team in the country, losing to their in-state, I want to say rival, but a team that loves to beat them any chance they can in Louisiana. And LSU loses 8-5, and so there was a lot going on. Vanderbilt, on top of it, loses 10-2 at home and almost gets run ruled. So it was. You saw Elon beating Wake Forest last week. I think it was, or the week before, and Wake Forest is currently 2nd in the country. They've only lost 5 games, and Elon beat them. I'm not saying Elon's a bad team, but they're having a good year. But it just goes to continue the discussion we have about some balance that we haven't had, especially with the transfer portal, the extra COVID years. I mean, I didn't check last night, but I'm listening to the broadcast. I know Andrew Allegretta said that that Indiana State's a veteran team. Have had some guys been there 5 years. A lot of guys been there a long, long time. So, and then coupled with what happened last Friday night, it was just a tale once again of in this league, you lose the first game and then you take the next 2 and you feel like you're going to jump off a bridge. The fan base wants to on Friday night. You and I talked, and we were just like, what in the world? Then you have the success the next 2. It's just part of this game, and it was a crazy week. Vanderbilt took care of business, won the series, and we talked about the end of the show last week. You start stacking series wins. They don't have to be sweeps, but you stack series wins, which they did against a team that, South Carolina is just going to try to slug people and beat them with their bats and win 13-11, and they're going to do a lot of that the rest of the year, and they got some deficiencies, but a very good team that's in a position to host a regional in South Carolina, and it was a good victory. So you have to kind of look at it from a 30,000-foot view of what you accomplished. Now, last night was disappointing. I know, Tim, were you there?
I was not. Chris, my son had a game.
Okay, so you didn't have to endure the press conference, but I knew that was coming. Post game.
For those who haven't seen it, how did that go? What happened?
He said it was a butt kicking in so many terms, and plain out butt kicking, and said that, which is true. He talked about the pitching and how they had to go with basically younger guys or sophomores who didn't pitch a whole lot last year. And his comment was, well, those guys, meaning if you want to say the bottom of their staff, I hate saying that, but just the ones who don't get to pitch as much, quote, they're on scholarship too. And they're expected to do their job. So, and which is true, when you're a team, you would expect to be able to handle an Indiana State, but you'd have a Dukanich who you would think in a normal situation he would have pitched. He didn't pitch last night, and you had the people who pitched, who had to step up because of the situation with Carter Holton, the situation with Hunter Owen not pitching. So everybody had to slide up in the rotation for the weekend, and you were basically pitching freshmen and sophomores for this game against Indiana State midweek against a team that was really, really hungry and a team that's really, really good. So, with the exception of Jack Anderson, who mopped it up in the 8th and 9th, it was all freshmen and people who hadn't pitched a whole lot. And when you do that, when you're playing older teams and teams that are good, last night's going to happen. And, I know Tim was upset. I could watching the press conference and reading the comments as he should be. He let that be known, but I think there's a little bit of motivation to get those guys who say, hey, you got to do your job too. You're the program that's at the expectations of what you're supposed to be doing, and they need to do better.
Yeah, I want to get to how that gets turned going forward, because I'm not sure if I'm Tennessee. I want to be playing a Vanderbilt team with angry Tim Corbin having popped his head up at the last appearance. There's some fair questions about Tennessee too, and motivation there to that after getting beat by Tennessee Tech. I'll table that for a minute, but yeah, first of all, last night I'm looking at the D1 scoreboard. These are all ranked teams that got beat. I'll give you the scores, and the ranked team would be the loser here. Northeastern 12, Connecticut 3, although Northeastern also a good team. Indiana 7, Louisville 3, although Indiana also a good team, albeit unranked. Let's see. Texas State 5, UTSA 3, although same thing there. Texas State's a good team. And Louisiana Tech 3, Southern Miss 1. Louisiana 8, LSU 5, Portland 10, Oregon 9. And UC Irvine, which is a good team, 12, UCLA 4, and Sacramento State 15, Stanford 13. That's not one you expect to see with Stanford's pitching, or what's usually got some pitching. But anyway, point is, a lot of teams got beat last night, a lot of ranked teams, and that's not to take away from how bad it looked, but I think you raised some fair points with the pitching. These weren't guys that have been throwing a lot for them lately, and I do think what you said is accurate. It's sort of, okay, they've got to regroup and get ready for a weekend series. They've got to hold some guys in reserve, because I would presume we don't see Owen again. I don't know. But yeah, I think it was just a weird night, combining circumstance, running into a hot team, and just playing horribly, to be honest.
Well, and then the inexplicable bunt with the bases loaded that turned out to be a play at the plate, easy put out. And I think it was the 3rd or 4th inning, and then just the wheels fell off. Just literally, Indiana State comes back with a huge, spot in the next inning, and the game just you were just chasing it the rest of the game, and not sure what was going on. I don't think it was a called situation with the bases loaded bunt, which easily, it's just a force out at home, but you just had some Shrek steals 3rd, and they're down 7 in the 7th or 8th inning. Yeah, just, and he puts his head in his hands immediately. And,
first and second with one out, and you're down, what was it, 8 or 9? Why do you – and this is a guy who's played a bunch of ball. Of all people, he should have known better.
Right. It's just this time of year, and I'm not trying to use this as an excuse. These guys are wrapping up classes, and they're probably finishing up projects. And I think the last day of classes is on next Monday after the UT series, and then you start in exams. And we all know that exams at Vanderbilt a little bit different than most SEC schools, and these kids are pushed. And you're emotionally, you come off of, you win 2 out of 3, and not that they underestimated Indiana State at all, but when it's just when you pit guys out there who have limited amount of innings and experience, I don't care what it is, I don't care what their star status was and who they played travel ball for and perfect game rating and all that. It's just different against a team that's veteran and hungry, and Indiana State exploited that, and they took the game last night. But it is make no mistake, those losses that you read across the board, across the top 20, top 25, there's a reason for that. It's not a fluke. It is across the board in this country. You're seeing teams that are more veteran, that you're not going to see the midweek games like you saw 5 and 10 years ago, especially this time of year. And I talked about last week where you're the blowouts, where you're getting the teams that are hot and that are continuing to, you're not seeing what you did in years past because of the direct reason why that Austin Peay has 18 new players on their team from the portal. The reason why that teams are moving, that within the conference, you're moving when you're having a Cassis going from Vanderbilt to South Carolina and immediately filling a need. It's the way it is, and it makes baseball better. If you're one of those teams, it makes them more competitive, and it makes the game probably a little more easier to relate to on a fan basis, that there's not blowouts and that the teams are getting better. But it sure does, if you're a top program, it makes you consider, like, who am I going to schedule? You want to do that balance of, you want to get some guys some work, and you want to, get your RPI up, your strength schedule. But, what you mentioned, and you have a better grasp of that, RPIs. I don't see how Tennessee, for example, is still in the top. I mean, I know they're 19th, but I mean, my goodness, if this weekend they fall and we get a 2 out of 3 or a sweep, not saying it's going to happen, but if that happens, I mean, they're in deep trouble of even making they got to start thinking about making the SEC tournament, not just the NCAA tournament. And things seem to be, they got players hurt, and it just goes to show you. There was a great article by Estes in the Tennessean this morning, and his comment line, and I don't know if it was the first line or it was the title of the article, was, UT's team last year wrote checks that this year's team can't cash. And
wow,
that rings true. That was a great, that point, when you talk all that and you do the antics and you trash talk and the fan base gets all electric, which is great. They're allowed to do that, but that passes on. A lot of those guys are gone, but the expectations that programs have, even in this portal era, is that you better be able to take it when it comes time that you falter, and that's what's happened to some teams around the country, and UT's one of them. That they better be able to react when they do get razzed by the fan bases or times go bad. They better be able to rebound from those times.
Couple things last night. If you hadn't checked the RPI in a day, you were in for some surprises. Indiana State moved all the way up from 19 to 13 with beating Vanderbilt last night, and Tennessee was the shocker. Tennessee moved down 17 spots in the RPI to 40 by losing to Tennessee Tech last night.
Interesting, yeah. And would you say that Kentucky's RPI, being number one, is it the fact that they've played LSU? They've played. I mean, is that where they're getting the benefit? Because I'm trying to read across. I know they're a good team, that they're valid to be in that. It's just shocking a little bit to me that they're the number one RPI, and I guess it's because they've already played a certain. Unlike Vanderbilt has Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Georgia as 3 of their opponents. Who has Kentucky played? I'm trying to because I know they played Indiana State 3 times, and that helps them because they swept them, meaning Kentucky. But I know the computer doesn't lie; it's the formula. But when you see their schedule and who they've beaten, and Southern Illinois, Wright State, Elon, I mean, those aren't any slouches, but They've also played Alabama, Missouri, and Mississippi State as well. It's just weird how the formula works to me.
Yeah, I'm looking at Kentucky's resume, and I think Kentucky is a better team than it's being given credit for being. I've seen people that in their projections that had Kentucky not as a national top 8 seed right now, and I get that a lot of it is looking forward and not believing and not thinking Kentucky's going to end up there. But like you gotta deal with what's in front of you. I think Kentucky to me is if I'm doing it, and I am actually doing it right now for my SEC channel, I haven't finished my work, but I've got Kentucky right now as a top 5 overall national seed based on the metrics the committee's going to use. Now, let me explain Kentucky to you a little bit. And again, I think Kentucky's a better team than it's given credit for being. To me, it's a top 10 team in the country. I don't have a problem with ranking them there, but okay, here's how Kentucky, I'm not going to say it gamed the RPI, but this is just how it's turned out. You play 3 games at LSU, which is 4 in the RPI. You're probably going to move up. Even losing all 3, you still do okay there. They played 3 games against Indiana State, which is a good team, as Vanderbilt found out yesterday. I'd think Indiana State, if I'm just ranking them, I'm probably putting them closer to 30 than I am to 13. So I think that game did a little bit. Missouri's 23 in the RPI right now. I don't think Missouri's that good, although I think Missouri's a good team. Alabama 24 in the RPI. I do actually think Alabama is that good. Those were on the road. Mississippi State at 26. The RPI does not jive with what I think State is as a team, although you look at some of the predictive computers and State's higher there than I would have thought. 3 at Georgia, which is 30 in the RPI, and Elon, 3 games at Elon, which is 33 in the RPI. I don't think Elon's anywhere near that good, but the RPI loves that team. So I think there's a little bit of, and Xavier, another team. They beat Xavier, which is 45 in the RPI. Another team I don't think is that good. So there's, again, I think Kentucky's a good team, but I think there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors to the RPI there.
Yeah, and the 10-3 record against the top 25 in the RPI definitely helps them. They haven't had any losses in the 200 plus. Unlike Vanderbilt has one. So yeah, it does. You have to really dive into there and see why how the system works, and it's a little bit confusing. But we'll find out next weekend just what their status is. I know they're a good team. It just goes to show you the top 2 teams in the RPI in the country, Kentucky and South Carolina, are 2 teams that last year at least were 2 teams you kind of wanted to see on your schedule. Of course, that was when we went to Columbia last year, and after running off some good performances and kind of started a little downfall. But it's just interesting how that works, Chris, how those 2 teams, especially Kentucky, has been a bottom feeder. They've had some years where they've done well, but at least the last 2 or 3 years where it has just been teams have had their way, especially Vanderbilt against Kentucky, and now you're seeing those 2 tops in the country, even ahead of Wake Forest at number 3 and LSU at 4 and Arkansas 5. So I guess we'll see with our own eyes in 2 weeks.
By the way, I'm looking at the thing that Warren Nolan does where it talks about what you need to do in your next game and the games that have been played against teams you played, what needs to happen there to move you up or down in the RPI. And Kentucky's got a massive lead at number 1 in the RPI. And Carolina's got a pretty substantial lead at number 2 over Wake, although that could change with a bad weekend for one and a good weekend for the other. But it's amazing how far Kentucky is in front of the field in the RPI. Vandy is in a spot at 7 where it's... This season of the Vandy Sports Podcast has been made possible by my friend Dr. Jody Jones, DDS. When it comes to general or cosmetic dentistry services, Jody is the best in Nashville. Just check out his client list. It testifies to that. He sees movie stars, music stars, athletes, coaches, you name it. Jody is the dentist of choice for stars in Nashville, but he sees regular folks like you and I as well. What people love about Jody's office is the ambiance. It's relaxing, it's friendly. Someone described it to me as a tooth spa. Whether your needs are general or cosmetic, go see Jody today. Call him 615-270-2322. See him at 55 Music Square East, not far from downtown or the Vanderbilt campus. Jody is a former Vanderbilt football player and a huge Commodore booster, so go and talk Vandy sports with him while you're there. Go see Jody Jones today. Thank him for his support of this podcast, because without it, this season would not be possible. It's going to take more than one or two games either way to move up or down. A pretty good gap between it and number 8 North Carolina State, and a decent gap between it and Virginia and Arkansas. It's closer to moving up, and also LSU at 4. It's closer to moving up than it is moving down, but it's kind of in a spot where there's a little bit of a distance either way. And that's kind of what happened to Tennessee yesterday. Is Tennessee was in a spot where I think the RPI was 23, but it was just barely ahead of some other teams. And when it took a really bad loss, and Tech is now 11-24, so that was a really bad loss. It completely tumbled down the rankings. And the scary thing for Tennessee, and we'll get into this series in a minute, I know we've got a few more Vanderbilt things to unwind, but Tennessee in the RPI, I'm looking at impact games here on Warren Nolan, and it could easily drop another 5 or 6 spots. It could also easily move up another, 10, but that's kind of where the Vols are at this point.
I mean, you look at Tennessee 2-11 against the top 25 RPI.
And see, that's the thing. When you start digging into the resume, looking at that, I don't think they're in the NCAA tournament field if it's picked today.
Probably not. They got some work to do. And of course, they had a brutal run where they had, it was murder's row, so to speak, and it continues this weekend for them. We talked about how the SEC is kind of like that. It'll eat you up and spit you out. And that's what's happening to them right now. But yeah, they've got that resume for them, especially just on the road. I mean, they're 1-9. That's just it's so different from what they've been the last several years. They would go on the road and take their traveling show, and it was the circus, and it was coming to town, and they were on it. And it's just been a direct difference. And you just wonder if not really playing anybody, Chris. I mean, they played Arizona. They lost 3-1 in the opener, but you look down at their schedule, and maybe they're going to have to reanalyze who they play. The Gonzagas of the world, the Alabama and A&M, and the Morehead States. That's really not getting you anywhere early on and testing to see what you got. And that seems like that's kind of what happened to the Vols this year, especially. Just 1-9 on the road compared to what they've been in the past is pretty amazing.
Well, in Tennessee's defense, the Vols are playing probably the most brutal SEC schedule I've ever seen. So you probably wanted to build yourself some grace in there. And frankly, if Tennessee is 6-9 right now in the league, just get one more win elsewhere. They've lost some close ones, and maybe take another game or two out of conference. They're right there where we're not having this conversation, but it is what it is.
And they've got some kid. They had second baseman went out last night. He's in a boot. Pitcher went out last night, holding his elbow and leaving the game, and so things are reeling for them. They're just going to have to coveted shortstop hasn't played in 2 weeks, and
something like that.
You got to wonder what's going on there too. So they probably will get it all together this weekend. Hope not, but things like that happen, and they just need a spark. They're playing at home, and perhaps in their case they'll get it done, but things do not look good for them the last 4 games. Going on a four game skid, that's the last thing you want to do is you lose to, Tennessee Tech has beaten them now 2 years in a row midweek. And you get swept on the road, you come home, you think you're going to rebound and get some good vibes going, and that just didn't happen in Knoxville last night.
Yeah, I can't decide if you want to catch Tennessee where it is, if that's the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, and I see your point. This is, I don't want to say it's a do or die weekend for them, but I mean, if you're Tennessee and you go to 5-13 or 6-12, I mean, it could get really, really rough. I mean, it is a definite uphill climb. And Vitello, I think, you would think based on his personality, what you see, that his persona that he puts out there, that he would have the ability to motivate those guys. But in today's kid, and I hate saying, today's kid, quote unquote, it's different. And you don't know what's going on in the locker room. You don't know if there's any dissension or people, falling on deaf ears, or you never know. And you usually find those things out later. But it's certainly, when you question a team's toughness, Chris, like he did publicly in Fayetteville on Sunday, and he's looking for some toughness and not sure how tough his team is, and then they come home and lay an egg against a team that's 60 miles or whatever to the west in Tennessee Tech. That doesn't show me a whole lot for what's going on in the locker room. I could be wrong, but it certainly doesn't show that toughness that he's desiring.
Yeah, I know they've got some chemistry problems. I just don't know what they are. I saw an interesting tweet, and I don't have it, but I think it was from Bryce Denton's brother, who is also Zane Denton's brother, talking about finger pointing and some stuff like that. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but I did read it a couple of times, and then I think it then got deleted. I've heard some of the same stuff privately. I don't know what their issues are, but you wonder, and this is what Tim Corbin got criticized for last year, right? Why aren't they going harder after people in the portal? And look, they did go after some guys in the portal, notably Paul Skeens, and my goodness, if they landed Paul Skeens, they'd be the number one team in the country right now. And they landed R.J. Schreck, who's been their best hitter this year, and he's been brilliant in conference games. But Tim's thing, as you know, is it's building culture. It is giving your Calvin Hewitts, your Troy Laneves, your TJ McKenzie's, your Jack Bolgers, your Parker Nolans, your Jack Andersons, your Sam Lebokis, your Thomas Schultz's, guys that have been with you for a long time. It is giving those guys a chance in that third and fourth year on campus to get some playing time, where in some cases those guys didn't always get it, or in other times where those guys got it early and they've been team leaders and part of the culture that he likes. And again, that broke different ways. You've got a guy named Jack Bolger who doesn't ever come out of the lineup for any reason these days, it seems like. And you got a guy in TJ McKenzie on the other end, or Laneve on the other end, where, they might get a pinch hitting at bat once a week. But you just sense it with this team. It feels like it's enjoying baseball more than it has in a while. He talked about all the off-field intangibles, the grade point averages, the things like that. It just, you could even tell in 2021, something seemed a little bit off about that team. And sure enough, you had kids missing curfew and stuff like that in Omaha that were prominent players. You had Kumar Rocker, who looked like he would rather be anywhere some days, but, talking to the media after games, which he didn't do a lot. There were just some things with that team that were off. I don't sense any of that this year. I could be wrong. Every team's got issues, but he has built a culture on good locker rooms and guys that are happy and rooting for the team's success, whether they are playing or not. Meanwhile, I'm not pointing fingers at any specific players or claiming specifics, but Vitello basically approached the offseason like it were fantasy baseball. In other words, okay, there's a guy over here that hit this last year, and we can plug him in over here. And there's a guy over there that hit and fielded this last year, and we can plug him in over there. Last year's team with them, they're playing Trey Lipscomb and some guys like that who bided their time and then got their chance to play. And that worked really well for them. This year, I'm sure you had some of the same case where you had guys waiting to play and they got recruited over. And again, I'm not telling you that's the culprit. I don't know what's going on. But you look at the results, you hear the things, you hear the things Vitello says, and they just sound like something is way off. I have to think there's something in how both those rosters got managed in the offseason that in one case is paying dividends and in the other case is doing something else.
Yeah, well, they got two guys in Vitello and Corbin to go about it totally two different ways. I mean, almost the antithesis of each other. I talked about that last year around this time, where it's almost like anything that Vitello does, he does. I'm not saying he does it on purpose, excuse me, but it is a way that, Tim Corbin for years used to go into Knoxville. He built a fence around the state of Tennessee, with the exception of Memphis, to get a few guys there, but he could go and get anybody he wanted to, and especially that strong program at Farragut High School in Knoxville. I saw, a kid just committed to Tennessee out of Farragut, left-handed pitcher who's committed for, I think it's maybe 2024. And so that's happening. Vitello's able to get some of those kids now that he wouldn't be able to get, but it's his way of doing it. And you either are attracted to it or you're not. And, the things that the portal is almost just, it creates, if you're Tim Corbin and you do that and you dip into the portal and you get 4 or 5 guys or 6 guys, if I'm a player, and I'm not saying that this has happened, but if it were to happen, you're almost saying that all the stuff that coach says to us is a lie. He talks about your positions are rented. They're not given to you. And by the way, I don't know if you know, on national television, John Williamson said the same thing about this bowling team when he was interviewed after the ladies won the national championship. He said that line, but of course he worked under Tim Corbin, but when he first came on before he became the bowling coach. But that line of renting positions, not owning them, and that you could lose it at any time, and playing with a hot hand, and you bring in 5 or 6 guys in the portal, then all the guys are going to go, well, what are you talking about? You've been preaching that, positions aren't earned, that positions have to be earned and not given to anybody. Well, if you're going to go get a guy in the portal, in order to get them there, you're going to have to almost guarantee them that you're going to start or you're going to be a frontline pitcher. And I don't think his staff just buys into that, because I think it definitely is against his locker room, how he wants to have the locker room, which is so important to him. And just the difference of what, as you just mentioned with Tennessee, what they've done, and Ahuna comes in and he's ineligible to being in the year, and why is he ineligible? And then now he's hurt, and you wonder if that ruffled some feathers. It's just two ways, two different guys trying to go about ways. One's real brash, and one acts like their crazy uncle, and the other one's more like their second dad. And their approaches, for the most part, the last couple of years, UT's been successful, and we know Vanderbilt's been consistent. But you just wonder if it catches up to you. Chris, I've watched some youth baseball here lately, and my son plays, and he's a middle schooler, so he's 7th grade and doesn't play a whole lot for his team, but he's on the team, made the team, and just watching, I texted a friend of mine who used to play for Vanderbilt, and he's a high school coach here locally at a high school, and I texted him at the game, and I was watching these two teams play, and I said to myself, I texted him, and I said, when did everything change in baseball about just the attitudes? And I know you got a youngster, you haven't seen this probably. He's in 3rd grade, I think he said. Just everybody walks around, and there's no hustling, and it's Joe Cool, and you got the oven mitt in the back of your pants, the sliding mitt that you wear when you get on base, and these kids are in the 3rd grade and they got sliding mitts on, and it's just
wow.
And so I texted my friend who, again, he played with me, Alan Purdy, who a good shortstop when I played. He was a freshman when I was a senior, and I said, how do you do this? And he just said, it's changed, man. The last couple years, it's different. It's just the mentality of baseball. It's just a very Joe Cool image. Everybody's got, I hate to give you something to look forward to, Chris, but there are fourth and fifth grade players who do celebrations at second base when they get a double now. They have their own little dance. And that's trickled down, of course, from and I don't mind enthusiasm and stuff, but just, gosh, it's just for a traditionalist when you to see young kids do that. And how this relates to Tennessee, I'll go back to what I said of cashing checks that those guys last year wrote and they're coming due and they're trying to cash them as far as the way they're handling the game. UT made it to College World Series last year. They didn't. 2 years ago they did. They got eliminated last year at home. But they've had success this last couple of years, and they've done it that way. And when things switch and they turn on you, it can be payback 20-fold if you don't watch it, and things kind of the baseball karma. I'm not saying for anybody listening here that I don't think you should be enthusiastic. I'm not saying I'm the get off my front lawn guy about baseball, but I am a traditionalist, and I believe that things come around. You got to treat the game with respect, and you got to earn the things that come to you. But it just seems like, as we're talking about Tennessee, that's a little bit of what's going on up there. They could get it turned around, yes, but it is, to me, that's what's going on up in Knoxville, and they still got time to turn around. I just hope it's not this weekend.
Yeah. Without being really specific, they made a lot of enemies last year, and I think it's had some ramifications for them. But
does your third grader have a sliding mitt? Please
no, but and I'm grateful. Like we're not going to put him in travel ball until he's probably 12 or 13. He's been asked to play travel ball since he was 5, and not like my son is any great shakes, but he's a decent ball player. But he comes home and instead of throwing pitches every day, he's outside shooting hoops because he got a basketball goal for his birthday 2 months ago, and that's the first. Like you can't get him. You can't get him in the house long enough beyond him changing into shorts and a t-shirt or whatever and going out and shooting. And he does that all day. That's and he great. Plays with friends. And he's just being a kid. I mean, he's barely 9. And we've got a coach. We've been sticking with the same rec coach for about 3 years because this coach he takes it in stride. He'll get on him a little bit sometimes, not like screaming at him or anything, but he'll tell them, hey, you need to pay attention, you need to hustle. But it's one of these things where a lot of times if you're playing in the infield one inning, you're playing in the outfield the next. And everybody gets a chance to play because we're not trying to make the majors tomorrow. And I've been deliberate Chris and I have been deliberate in keeping him in that kind of situation because I think as a dad, and we're getting way off topic here, I do have a transition from this to a place you were going. My biggest thing is I just want to make sure by the time it actually matters that he doesn't hate baseball anymore, if that makes sense. And if he doesn't make the majors because we didn't have him in travel ball at 9, then I'll worry about that later. But
I got it.
But I will say this. I was joking around with him one day. We were listening to the Edwin Diaz music, the Timmy trumpet. I said, you want me to play that when you come in to pitch? He's like, yes, I do. And so now, like every time before which I think it's kind of funny because it's like all the things you said about taking baseball very seriously. The league we're in is one where, and I apologize, I'm getting way off topic, but like generally most of the coaches share the same values, although we did have a coach last year who pitched his kid over the pitch limit. I know this because I track pitches in a game for both teams, and he was about 6 over, and we said, hey, your guys at your limit. Like, no, we're keeping count, and we got him under. And I'm like, I'm watching your dugout. Nobody over there is charting pitches.
Right.
And then we win the game on a walk-off. And then they go after the fact, protest the bat to the umpire, and they call him out because the kid who was hitting had played in an open league where those bats were legal, and he used it in the game. And I'm like, thanks a lot, jerk. You can't track your own pitcher, and I know I caught you doing it. And you keep him in the game, when you're trying to protect an arm, but then you protest about after the fact, after we walk you off, which we were going to do anyway. But yeah, that's you see all kinds of stuff, but I do. My kid is the only one who has music, and I did it kind of as a joke. I just think it's funny because it's like, these are 9-year-olds. But he's like, yeah, Dad, play. And then like every time before the game, he'll come out of the dugout and he'll come up to me in the stands and go, Dad, don't forget to play my music if I come into pitch.
Well, yeah, and I'm not against people having fun and doing so. I'm not that. That's not what I'm saying, but it creates, it's just a lot of laziness, a lot of walking around, a lot of stuff that, pure baseball traditionalists kind of sit there and go, when did this happen? And it's been confirmed by a couple coaches who coached a lot of travel summer ball for the last 10, 15 years, and they said it's a trend that's happened. So, a lot of these rules that have been changed, I don't know if you saw the rule changed midweek last week. Kendall Rogers kind of put it out there that the contact period for baseball now has been switched. And I guess it was, I don't know how they're retroactively going to do this, but they're now going to make to where football and basketball are the only two sports in NCAA Division I where you can have contact before a kid's junior year. Before, baseball was one. So you had, speaking of Vitello, some players up there, kids in the 8th and 9th grade wearing jerseys and verbally committing, quote unquote, to Tennessee when they're in the 9th grade. I know Vitello got a verbal commitment from a kid at a local high school here, private school, when he was in 9th grade. He's a third baseman. I don't know if that kid's going to live up to that. I haven't heard his name recently, but these coaches, again, Tony Vitello being one, who he's brash. He's just throwing a bunch of offers out there, get a bunch of verbal commitments. Well, these kids don't know what they're. First of all, a college coach should not have to feel the pressure of knowing if a kid who's 12 or 13 years old is going to project to be the same as when he's 18. And so the pressure has now been taken off these coaches, which a guy like Tim Corbin will probably love. Instead of chasing, since everyone else is doing it and everyone else, you don't want your rivals making offers to top flight players. Now, you cannot have contact on the baseball side, a commitment. You can have face-to-face conversations until August 1st going into the player's junior year. And the old rule it was Wild West, 8th grade, 9th grade, whatever, verbal commitments, and now basketball, and football are the only two that you can do that. Now, I think that should change too, because again, how can you project that? And it allows to build a relationship and really evaluate these kids when they're juniors and seniors in high school rather than when they're 8th and 9th grade. I think it's impossible. I think it's a great move by the NCAA. I think they need to do it for football and basketball too. And those are the money makers, and it's probably why that's not going to happen with the AAU circuit and the travel ball circuit, 7-on-7 leagues and all that. But I don't know if you noticed that rule. I don't think we talked about that, but that was Rogers kind of tweeted about that. And, I wonder how they're going to do that retroactively if they've gotten verbal commitments from sophomores in high school, and now they can't talk to them until their junior year, August 1st, how that's going to work. I don't know if you saw any of those tweets or not, but I was glad to see
I did. That. I was going to ask you about it. To me, that probably helps Vanderbilt for a number of reasons. I mean, Vanderbilt was getting its share of commitments from freshmen and sophomores too, and a lot. I wonder if that hurt them last year. I mean, a lot of those kids have been committed for a while, and I don't think several of them were probably ever coming here. Although I think a few of them continued to talk a good game to the staff right up till the draft day, and then all of a sudden you're seeing guys come off the board earlier than you thought might, and you're like, okay, what's going on here? But yeah, I mean, I think
you can't. Yeah. I mean, it's just, if you're an assistant coach, you got to love it. If you're a recruiting coordinator, you got to love it. It's not that you don't have to evaluate those kids. Sure, they know the top flight programs know who the best 12-year-old in Georgia is probably, and the top. They know it. But there just can't be that communication now. You can't email, you can't DM, you can't be on campus, and you can be on campus and go to a camp, but there can be no talk about an offer or commitment or verbal commitment. You look on those websites now, you search Vanderbilt's 2025 and 2026 commitments, they're there. But it's because I think they've had to do it. And because everybody else,
right.
You can't just sit there and let everybody else do it and you don't do it. Now, supposedly, if everybody follows the rules, that's going to be the case as far as the new rule going forward.
Well, and in the meantime, you had they couldn't get the third paid assistant for forever. So you just wonder about the demands on the job and the time, and then throw the portal on top of everything else.
Right. Exactly.
All right, let's back up a minute. I want us to hit some topics with the baseball season. You brought this up before the show off air. I thought it was a good place to go. So I want to hit this. I want to hit the series this weekend, and then I want us to do the mailbag, which I darn near forgot about. So we are a little past the midway point. What is standing out to you right now about this team this year, and maybe where it exceeded expectations, and maybe if it's fallen short anywhere?
Well, 15 games in, I always like to look at it, halfway point before I even assess. But 13-2 is certainly something that we talked about this last week, that after some non-conference games early in the season, we wouldn't have thought that this team would have been 13-2 at this point. So that's a surprise, I think, a pleasant surprise. I think the consistency in the lineup has been a little surprising to me, that there hadn't been many variations in the last month. I think they've rolled out the same 9 pretty much, or the 8. You got the pitcher, of course, but position-wise, you see the consistency of having, you'll see Calvin Hewitt come in the 7th inning. That's pretty much a normal deal. So, we're talking about Tim being a creature of habit. But it's been a little more consistent as far as the order, who goes out there, than I would have thought at this time of year. 13-2 is a good record, very good record. And at this point, had 2 bad losses, the Central Arkansas loss, and then I don't know if last night's not as bad, but just the way it appears, being at home, almost getting run ruled. Pitching staff wise, I think my mid-season assessment has been, certainly they miss Andrew Djukanich. Would like to have him in there for that midweek role, and perhaps on the weekend. Hunter Owen has been a pleasant surprise, although that wasn't really a surprise to you. I think you said some people were saying he maybe had the best stuff going in the fall. Carter Holton being injured was a little surprising, not pitching, and then the way he came about this past weekend and didn't get out of the first inning. That's a little bit of a surprise to me. Hope he can rebound and get those guys going. I'm not sure if he's going to throw this weekend or not. So I think pitching staff-wise, top to bottom, I think last night kind of exposed the bottom half of the bullpen, so to speak. But they're young, and that's to be expected, as I said, against a very good Indiana State team. But offensively, I would say a little bit surprised on the midseason evaluation that Diaz, after starting the season with 5 errors, I don't know the last time he's had an error. He had majority of those 5 early on the first couple weekends. He settled down. When they made the switch and they sort of rearranged the chairs on the deck, I think that was a good move that Corbin and staff did. So that's kind of my team evaluation. Enrique Bradfield getting caught 4 times stealing, you can say that's somewhat a surprise, although what he's been doing the last 2 years has been short of phenomenal, hardly ever getting caught. This team, above average speed, they're 59 of 73 in stolen bases for the year. I think that's on track to be a little bit better than they were last year, a little bit more overall speed. I think top to bottom than they've had in the last couple of years. So that's just my thoughts. You might throw some in there, but at the halfway point, I think they're in good shape.
Yeah, one surprise, and if I were critical of one thing they've done in the midweeks, I don't know how you take this guy out of the lineups, but Chris Maldonado, I feel like he doesn't get talked about enough, just because it feels to me, and I'd have to look this up, I may be dead wrong, he's just so consistent. It's like if he goes 1 for 4 one day, he goes 2 for 4 the next day. There's usually a double in there somewhere, it seems like, or an extra base hit. This kid in the SEC, he started 14 games. He's hitting .365 with a .452 on base and a .635 slugging. That's just in SEC games. he just has been so consistent, which is really hard for a freshman to do. And to me, that's one of the surprises, because remember, he wasn't even in the lineup, I don't know, for the first 3 weekends of the season, maybe?
Yeah, he wasn't. I mean, yeah, he's a doubles machine. He's got 11 on the season, and Vastine and Shrek have 12, just below him, being Maldonado. But yeah, he's been a pleasant surprise. I should have mentioned him. I mean, how he came in as a freshman, and Tim Corbin says he's still, even though he's in that DH role consistently, he's one of the first guys out there taking ground balls before the game, weekends, whenever he can, hitting in the cage, and he's going to be one, I think, that in years to come will be one that plugged in and get his share of playing time. But the other one would be another thing we didn't talk about, how we had the beginning of the year with Calvin Hewitt starting in left, and how Polk has kind of inserted himself in that position in his spot. It was, of course, Calvin Hewitt started off the year red hot. He's played in 32 games, so he's played in 32 of the 37 games. It's just a lot of those have been in utility. But, Polk has worked hard. He's hitting 293, just under 300, and he has some good numbers too. So Polk, offensively, I would say Austin, Polk, and Diaz have had their share of stepping in roles that some people might not have thought they would have been in this early, and they've done well offensively. And Diaz cooled a little bit of late, but those three have stood out as far as not surprises, but maybe a little ahead of where you thought they'd be.
I'm going to give you one little thing to watch. And first of all, this is the odd stat line of the year. I don't know that you could do this again as anybody and repeat this, but Matt Polk has had 49 at-bats in SEC play. He's been hit 4 times. He's taken 0 walks. 0 walks. So that would be 49 at-bats, add in 4 hit by pitches. That's 53 plate appearances without a single walk in the SEC. You almost think you take one by accident. Also, he's only hit 2 home runs. He's only struck out 11 times. So that means he's put 36 balls in play. And they've had a ton of runners on base in the league, as you may have noticed. He's yet to hit into a double play this year.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting.
In the league,
he's only walked. Yeah, and he's only walked 3 times overall the whole season, if you do the non-conference games too. So that carries on over. But this team does not see, I would think in years past, I've moaned and complained and given my 2 cents about this team. And if you just an overall offensive at the midway point analysis, this team has made some adjustments, and it looked like that happened before the Belmont game at the Sound Stadium. But they do not strike out as much. They are more aggressive early in the count. They foul pitches off and make contact, put the ball in play more than they have the last 2 seasons that I know drove a lot of people crazy. And you just don't see the strikeouts. The numbers are there. They're still, you've got Vastine leads the team in strikeouts with 35, and Nolan's right below him at 36, Vastine 35, Nolan. But there does not seem to be, the numbers aren't as high, and you see a lot more making pitchers on the other team work, fouling pitches off, and definitely when you get fastball, green light fastball early in the count, these guys are attacking.
Yeah, Nolan, I think, has been a little underappreciated. SEC play, he's hitting 286, 403, 589, has only made 1 error. And here's one that I would watch as if something changes with the lineup, here's where it could be. I mentioned Polk. He's hitting 327 in the league, but he's only got a 370 on base because he doesn't ever walk. It's only 11 at-bats, and then add in, and well, this guy hasn't walked either, although he's been hit twice, so that's 13 plate appearances. Calvin Hewitt, who always comes in the 7th inning for defense anyway, is hitting 545, 615, 636 in the league. So that might be the one to watch, is if you see a change and a starting position somewhere, that would seem to be based on stats. I mean, the other one would be Bulger and Espinal, but he seems committed to have Bulger's bat in there every day, regardless of whether he's catching, which he usually is, although you're seeing Espinal getting those midweek starts a lot, which is probably smart given the wear and tear on the catcher.
Yeah, and I would say it also a different something different a little bit than last year. I talked about the consistency of the lineup that this team that's thrown out there. Pretty much you can guess what it's going to be as far as the position players. Different than years past, and I just noticed this, Vanderbilt's only played 15 players on that as far as at-bats. Only 15 players have gotten at-bats throughout the season. You've got your sort of 9 regulars, and then you have 6 more after that. Seems like that number's been a little higher in years past, more guys getting opportunity, but there's 3, 4, 5 guys on that team who hadn't gotten a single at-bat all year. And don't you think that's a little bit different than years past? I'm not sure what that tells you, but
I bet that's the lowest number in a while.
Yeah, and you've got one kid, Arias, is that how you say it? Ivan Arias, he's gotten in 5 games, but he has 2 at-bats, and Troy Leneve only has 8 at-bats. So really, the majority of the at-bats are coming from 13 people, which I would, if I had to guess, I think that's a comparatively record low compared to years past.
Yeah, I bet it would be too.
Okay, let's look towards the Tennessee series. Presumably Christian Moore won't play. He has hit in the league 255, 394, 353, but I think he's maybe been their best hitter on the whole. Tennessee's got one guy with an on-base percentage north of 400 in league play who's a regular. That's Hunter Inslee. He's hitting 333, 423, 467. They don't have a single guy slugging higher than 467 in the league, which is a far cry from where they were a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, that was the article that I talked about this morning in the paper that Estes wrote. I mean, it's just where they were last year in all those categories. They're at the bottom, and they still have the arms. I mean, I think when you talk about league play, I don't have it in front of me. How's their ERA and league play? Because I'm just looking at it overall. But you got Beam, Dolander, and Burns. That's a formidable punch still. And don't think that they're going to be. This series for them is always contentious. I mean, they've had their way here in Nashville with how they handle us here and at the Hawk. But there's a lot of I've got some friends who are up there and close to the baseball program, and a cousin of mine who's close to the program of all the sports. But I saw him over the spring break, and they're pointing to this. They think that Corbin and Van Horn are the ones who turned Vitello in, and they're convinced that they're the culprits. Whether they are or not, I really don't know and don't care. But they're going to be, the Hornets are going to be circling there. There's going to be, I think, a lot of there'll be a big crowd, and I would expect, and if I'm Tim and his staff, to just have the guys on being razor sharp and not listening to what's being said from the stands and from the other dugout, because I know there's going to be a lot of finger pointing, the message boards and the media and all that. I think are going to probably make this and stew it up as far as being something involved in. When you're a player, you have to just zone all that out and have tunnel vision of what you're doing and not listen to all that. I think these guys have been in environments before, but they've been to Starkville this year and had their way with them, and that really just took the crowd out of it. Had great crowds there, not as much as what they had against Ole Miss, where they, I think, broke the single game attendance record this past weekend with 16 or 18,000 for that park. But I think they're going to walk into an environment that's going to be pretty contentious, and they need to just stay focused and know that they could do a lot of damage to their rival this weekend if they can win the series. Or you don't talk about the sweep, but do that. That would be great too. But this is UT they're going to be fighting for their lives and trying to rebound, and they got some guys hurt. And we'll see if that translates. But I don't know if you'd heard any of that from your sources. But I do predict it'll be pretty interesting environment here for the Vandy boys this weekend.
Yeah, I can confirm. I'm not saying they did it. I don't know the truth one way or the other, but they believe it was Van Horn, and of course Vitello worked for Van Horn. He was his recruiting coordinator in Arkansas, which think some friction there was their scholarship chart was a little bit of a mess when he left, given all the commitments they'd taken. And I think that's where some of the friction between those two started. And they think Van Horn and Corbin are where the fingers are being pointed for them being turned into the NCAA, which I think has been a big distraction. I suspect what it had to be when Vitello got suspended for a weekend series that the school made the suspension on. But yeah, I mean, the big issue, and I said this all last year, everybody was talking about how they were hitting, and that lineup and the numbers were numbers for the ages. They put up some numbers that in all games we probably won't see touch for a while, especially when you would hope the NCAA does some things about the ridiculous offensive numbers that are being produced. But you've heard that rant before. But I have a feeling, last year's team put up some offensive numbers that you're probably not going to see again for a while. But I always said I thought what was unbelievably impressive with them, I thought that the pitching got overshadowed given what those offensive numbers were a year ago. Well, this year, their team ERA in the league is 5.16, which is not bad for the SEC, especially with the schedule they have played. Now, here's the problem, or one of the problems. They've given up 23 earned runs in league play. So that's a run and a half per game unearned that they're giving up. And you just can't do that in the SEC and expect to win.
No, and they're not playing well defensively either, and they're doing someone mentioned the other day, the little league type errors in the Fayetteville that cost them, and it seems like hitting a lot of double plays and just the things that when it rains it pours type deal that when you get on the road. But who's to know that starting off 0-3 and at Missouri losing that series has just affected them throughout, and they haven't been able to get over it. But the 1-9 mark on the road really stands out to me as being something that is crazy because they did get the win in LSU, so the talent is there that they can go into an environment like that and win at least a game against the number one team, the number one ranked team in the country. But they have certainly had their games, and this is what happens when you feel like we're going to wait till this week. This weekend's going to be the weekend we're going to turn around, and then it doesn't happen. And then it's, this weekend, when we get back home, we're going to turn it around. And then it doesn't happen. And then the next thing you're at the midway point, and you're 5-10, and you're 7 games behind your in-state rival in standings. That's what they've got to be looking at. And if you're playing them and you have a chance to make it up, you have a chance to potentially gain 3 games on Vanderbilt. But you also have the potential to be 10 games out if they sweep you. So, a lot on the line this weekend. I know that they will be primed and ready to go, and it'll be a great atmosphere and at that stadium this weekend. But the boys just need to go on there level-headed, and I'm sure they will. And flush last night what happened against Indiana State, and hopefully go with a full rotation. We don't know anything about that yet, but let's hope that they can get back on track and get those guys healthy.
Yeah, from a Tennessee standpoint, they've still got a lot of arms. Now, here's the one thing, Beam, this has kind of been the quiet thing with them, is Beam's not been nearly as effective. He had a really good ERA in league play till last weekend, and he gave up, I think, 6 in an inning and 2/3. So now at 4.95, but the problem with him, he's given up 10 unearned runs too. So the ERA says that's a pretty good pitcher, but he's given up a lot of runners and a lot of unearned runs. Dolander had been near the same guy. I think he's better than what's shown, but the problem Dolander's had is just getting through games efficiently. I don't know what to make of Burns. He's been awful, but he did pitch out of the bullpen last weekend against Arkansas and was really, really good. More like the Burns we saw a year ago. They still got other arms. They've got Lindsey and Halverson have been really good in league play. Kirby Cannell's thrown a lot of big innings for them over the years and been good. Xander Sechrist is a guy they could use in a pinch. They've still got plenty of good arms. It's kind of confusing to look at when you see the inputs they've got and the results they've had. But the thing I'm wondering, they're going to be really fired up for this series for sure. But I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because this is a team that has just had so many issues regulating their emotions when their backs were against the wall. And I think you saw that cost them the Notre Dame series last year that kept them out of Omaha. And I don't know if what happened the last couple of weeks is a turning point. At some point, you got some mature leaders in the dugout that are able to say, hey, this is, because I remember Ole Miss had the same thing last year. Ole Miss was 7-14, although the circumstances were different in the SEC. All the talk there was they're making a coaching change. Obviously, that's not the conversation they're having in Knoxville right now. But Ole Miss lost a midweek game about this time last year to kind of a bad team, and it was a lopsided score, kind of like the one was against Tennessee Tech yesterday. And you're thinking it's all about to be crumbling down. And you know the rest of the story. They white-knuckled it into the NCAA tournament and won the whole thing. Let me tell you, this team's better than that team, I think. At least from a pitching standpoint, it's a lot better. So I think anything could happen. But I just don't know what to make of it all. I don't know if Tennessee losing that game yesterday the way it did to an awful Tennessee Tech team, and by the way, they threw 11 pitchers. What's up with that? I don't know if that's the best thing or the worst thing to happen. And I don't know if that's the best thing or the worst thing to happen to Vanderbilt, losing that game to Indiana State yesterday. It's just a really strange setup. And I think if you're trying to read this into it or that into it, good luck in getting that right.
Well, you try to connect the dots. 2 years ago, they make it to Omaha for the first time in a long, long time. Vitello finally makes it. This brash team that, does all the antics and has, and the fur coats and everything, they get eliminated, they go home. So then the next year is going to be their year, right? They just go on a rampage. They're going to be the favorites and they win 50-something games, and then they fall on their face and they lose to Notre Dame. And then you say to yourself, then they get a bunch of guys drafted, and then you say, all right, well, we've reloaded, and then Vitello gets suspended, and you got some controversy with some recruits and finger pointing, and all this stuff happens, and then you're 5-10 in the SEC at the midway point. Coach speak. As a coach, you try to do. There's different things you can do. You can rally the players by giving them support and defending them to the hilt. You can rattle the cage, and you can, like in Bull Durham, you can throw the bats into the shower and tell them they're lollygaggers and scare them, and which is one of the greatest scenes of all time of any baseball movie, I will say. But
no doubt.
But when you can try that, you can challenge the players. You can challenge the players like Vitello did in Fayetteville on Sunday and question their toughness. And then when that doesn't work, what do you do? There's just all sorts of things you as coaches, you try to do whatever is going to get the reaction you want. But sometimes when you're not getting it, you just run out of things to do. But I do point back to that Ole Miss team. This team, Tennessee team, has the talent to scare some people if they get in. But the problem right now is they got to get in. And that Ole Miss thing. I mean, you mentioned they were talking a coaching change at Ole Miss. I mean, they went home in the SEC tournament when I think we eliminated them, right? First game.
Carter Holton, yes.
They were going to make a coaching change. If you know the inside scoop, which is a whole other show, Ole Miss was gone. And then they ended up going to the tournament, getting in, and the rest is history. And they win the whole thing. So anything can happen, and the talent's there with them. But sometimes it's the intangibles and what's going on behind the scenes that's more important.
When you're dropping all the movie references and lines, I was just waiting for you to bring Hats for Bats out. I'm disappointed that didn't happen.
No, there's a lot out there. I still, The Natural and Bull Durham and all the baseball. I mean, I watched them all and still can kind of quote most of the lines in them.
Hats for Bats. Keep bats warm. Okay, let's go to the mailbag. That's been warming for a bit. We've done an hour and 7 minutes.
Oh, goodness.
Which I didn't expect, and we haven't even gotten to the mailbag. That's sponsored by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, give Taylor or Russell a call at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Papa Hick VU asked some questions. We've hit some of these, but first one, most pleasant surprise.
Pleasant surprise as far as what category?
Just with the baseball team as a whole.
Oh, just the team in general. God,
13-2 was a surprise to me.
13-2, yeah. When we mentioned that, I would say above all on a team aspect, I would say the record being 13-2 at this time. If you're looking for individual exploits, I did mention the fact that you had that Austin, Diaz, Polk trio of guys who are played their way into positions to everyday starters, and I think that's been a bonus. But I would say above those three on an individual basis, and you talked about this, and it was a great comment. Just you expect it out of Shrek, you expect it out of somewhat Nolan that he's a veteran. Bolger's been around a while, but the fact that Chris Maldonado has stepped in this league and is batting .360 with 11 doubles, 32 hits, 4 homers, I think he's got to be your offensive surprise of the season. I think you'd probably agree from what you said.
Okay, with the hardest part of the SEC schedule coming up, what's your prediction on the team's record the rest of the regular season?
Got to go to Gainesville, got to go to Knoxville, got Kentucky at home, got to go to Gainesville. So it's not Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Georgia. With 15 games to play, right? How many are home? What's as far as the number of series? Is that
it's 9 road games, 6 home games.
6 home games, 9 on the road. It's going to be Gainesville's going to be tough. That's always tough to go down there. This weekend's going to be tough. Gosh, you put me on the spot. You put me on the spot last week, Chris, and the mailbox put me on the spot here. But I said we'd take 2 out of 3 this weekend. I was correct. On Friday night, I was ready to backtrack on that, knowing who we were going to have to pitch after hearing the guys were going to be out. I would say, this team, I could see an 8-7 finish going down the stretch. 9-6, I think would be really good based on where they got to play. And somewhere in that vicinity, I think it's not going to be the easier games, and a lot have to do with the way we played. I mean, you go down to Starkville and you put 26 runs on the board. That's impressive. I don't care how bad they are at that point in the season. Mississippi State, it's tough to do. But I think a 9-6 finish in the conference would put you, 22-8. That'd be a hell of a season, a regular season. 8-7, 9-6, 8-7. It would be something that you wouldn't sneeze at.
Yeah, I had circled 21-9 as their final SEC record before the South Carolina series. I had 2 wins coming against South Carolina. Again, I would have changed that pick knowing what was going to happen with Holton and Owen. I would have been right to have stuck with my original pick. But I think 8-7, and it's conservative, but it just feels like a sweep is going to be hard for them to pick off against anybody. And look, if they went up and got swept in Knoxville, I'm not predicting. If you put a gun to my head, I'm going to say they win the series just based on being the better team, and they won the last time they were up there when that was a circus too. But I would be lying if I told you I have any clue how that's going to turn out. And I mean, I don't know. 8-7 seems pessimistic given the way they've played, but again, you look at what's to come, and it's a gauntlet.
Yeah, I don't think with Arkansas, Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee in that range, I think that's to some, the way they played the first year, it might seem very conservative, but I think if you can get out of this league with 21-9 record, that is a hell of a season in the SEC.
Let's see. The next question is, what's your take on LeBoke? He never recovered, or has he never recovered from his injuries to be effective? Does Coach Tim Corbin look to him now just to eat innings in games that are out of reach in order to save other arms for another day? That seems a little pessimistic to me. I mean, when LeBoke's been good, he's been really, really good.
Yeah, he has gotten the ball up in the zone quite a bit and has been hurt by that. That's the one thing I've noticed. He's given up 5 home runs, which is close to the top of the team, and you've got Cunningham with 7, and you've got Futrell with 6, and that's been his problem. Coming back from that injury, I mean, you look at the raw numbers: 31 strikeouts in 24 innings. So, he still has the giddy up on his fastball. It's just that thing takes a long time. That injury takes a long time to recover from, and it is not. His took a little longer, and I mean, he was back. Hell, he is probably academic wise, he's already graduated. I don't know. I mean, he's been here forever, but the ERA is a little lofty. Yes, 6.38, but I think it's just a matter of time of him getting innings. He's thrown 24 this year and throwing them out there, but I do know the fastball's been up in the zone. That's where he's gotten hurt the most. But you look at just the numbers of the strikeout walk numbers are really impressive. More strikeouts than innings pitched, 31 to 24. I think he just needs some time. I don't think he's somebody to give up on right now.
Okay, this also from Papa Hick. Any idea what happened on Polk's at bat last night? Was it a missed sign or just a complete brain freeze on his part in assessing the situation? I'm guessing it had to be a missed sign because he doesn't bunt.
Right, and with the bases loaded in general, that reeks of being a missed sign. You would hope because whether he just did that, just misreading a sign or just doing on his own does not make a sense because he doesn't seem like he's the type of kid, who would bunt, especially with the bases loaded. And people say why. Some people might, all you got to do is step on home. You rarely see a safety squeeze or a suicide squeeze, bases loaded, because all the pitcher has to do, if he can field it, is just flip underhanded. Catcher staying in front of the plate doesn't have to make the tag. So, not sure if that would have been a question you would have asked if you were there, Chris. Post game,
it probably would have been.
Well, we wouldn't have known, won't know. But it definitely did not make sense to me.
Pepperdor, what's going on with Diaz? Last year, the feeling around here was he hit the freshman wall, which is understandable, but worryingly, he seems to be hitting some sort of wall in his sophomore year. How concerned should we be?
I think he's in the spot defensively. We talked about his errors coming in, and he had a couple boots that first weekend and few consecutively, as a matter of fact, and you worried about him. But since the change was made, and he's, they had the moving of Vastine and just moved the players around. I think that he's more comfortable there. At least the pressure's off him there. But I don't, this league will eat you up. I mean, he's hitting 255, yes, and that's gone down slightly, but I still believe in the kid. I think you're going to hit walls in this league. I don't care if you're freshman, sophomore, junior, 5th-year player, or whatever. And I still like his approach at the plate. I think his aggressiveness. I like it. So I'm players are going to hit different walls throughout the season. Who would have say Calvin Hewitt hit a wall at the early of the year? He started off like gangbusters, and then, of course, regulated himself and to the point where Polk took his spot in left field, but he still counted on and has enough staff. The coaching staff has enough time. Not ready again at the halfway point. I think Diaz is still viable, and I think it's too early to tell if he's hit some sort of wall. I think big things of him down the stretch here.
I'm trying to pull up what he did yesterday because I did not get to see, for full disclosure, much of that game because my son had a game. I was following it on Game Tracker, and every time I looked down, it was one mini disaster after another as I was checking that. Let's see what Diaz did yesterday. He was 0 for 5, 1 strikeout. He was 0 for 4 with 1 strikeout on Sunday. He was 0 for 3 with 1 strikeout on Saturday. So that makes him, 0 for his last 13, although he's put the ball in play.
Yeah, it was only 1 strikeout
last year. The game before that, he was 2 for 5 on Friday night with 2 strikeouts, and the hits were he had a double in there. And I will say this, on Sunday's game, he got out in front of a changeup or something, and I was sitting next to the TrackMan guy or whatever they use, and it was 110 off the bat. So of course it didn't count for anything, but he hit the ball hard in that instance, which is something. And another one that's been mentioned as a guy that may be hitting the wall was Austin. Well, let's not forget Austin was a foot away from a grand slam on Saturday too. So I don't know. Maybe they're hitting a wall, or maybe it's just the cycles of baseball, and we're premature in making a judgment. I guess we'll know in time. But
yeah, I think you're right. I just think it's baseball's a game of failure. The joke is, you're hitting 362, you're failing 6.5 times out of 10 rather than the success. So. It's a tough league. There's tough arms in this league, and adjusting at their age, it's just difficult task that they're faced with each weekend.
Yeah, South Carolina also has probably a top 3 pitching staff in the league too.
Oh yeah.
Top 3, I mean, at least top 4. I wouldn't put them outside the top 4 for sure.
Yeah, wasn't impressed with their fielding though. Goodness.
Oh, that was a disaster.
Booted the ball around there.
Old Jack Wagon, similar to Chris Lee's admitted frustrations, what is Chip's view of college baseball with a heavy tilt towards offense and all the noise and nonsense around bats, balls, etc.? Do we see any effort on the horizon to take a step back to a more reasonable balance, or is this here to stay?
I'm going to defer to you on that because I saw a tweet that you did, and your 2 cents on that. I mean, since you kind of attacked it over the weekend, I think you wrote a comment about there were different bat eras. And I know you were pretty disgusted with it, saying, why don't you take that one?
Well, look, this is not based on any information. The NCAA should have known in the offseason it had a big problem with offense and tampered bats and all kinds of stuff. Again, I talked to somebody at the NCAA a year ago, and they were completely clueless, which is no surprise probably. But I look at what happened last time. It was around 2013, where they took it, and Major League Baseball is the same way too, although Major League Baseball is actually getting some stuff right for a change. Some stuff, not all of it. MLB is going to have its own issues with offense too. They brought singles and steals back into the game, but the ball is also traveling, so that's going to be a nightmare for pitching. But last time this happened, what the NCAA did is it brought back a ball that I think had, I don't remember if it was more drag or what it was. They had the year that the really high seam baseball, and then you couldn't hit it out of the park with the sledgehammer. And now that's kind of the NCAA for you. Like the bats were about this hot in 2010, and nobody could pitch, and they made it to where it was ridiculous. My guess is that's what they'll do. Like in a year or two, it'll be back to something where, the baseballs wouldn't get out of the park on a normal Aaron Judge home run swing, and you see something absurd the other way. Because I thought baseball, 2014-ish when they won the national title, I didn't really care for that product. I mean, you should be able to hit some home runs, and you couldn't hit one at all. Now it's just silly in the other direction. Given the NCAA's track record to do something appropriately, my prediction would be they would overreact and ruin it the other way.
And those, you got to continually worry about the exit speeds off these bats.
Yeah.
Which, there's the ball still comes off so super hot, and now I understand they have do they have things in the press box that monitor that? Because I know that.
Yeah, I usually sit next to the TrackMan guy, and it's not always accurate, but it's interesting.
Yeah, well, generally what happens is you get a plethora of people getting hurt, third baseman getting balls off their forehead and what have you, and there's people react. But yeah, it's funny that you just think they just somewhere in wherever the baseball headquarters dungeon, there's this guy with baseballs on shelves and looking at them. What are we going to do this year? I mean, but it's fun. I mean, they can. If people don't think they don't manipulate the ball, they do. I mean, it's just you can tell. You can even tell by almost the sound off the bat whether balls are hot at a certain time, certain years, and not. bats are hot. They try to legislate all that. You haven't heard. I will say this: you haven't heard as much about the bats this year publicly. I don't know if you have. I just haven't seen as many stories about stickers, and I know that the umpires now are checking the bats before the game instead of two managers looking at each other and saying, "Oh, are you good? Oh, yeah, are you good on these bats?" I mean, the fact that they did that in the first place, I think, was ridiculous. At least now, from what I'm told, the umpires are part of that process as far as checking the bats. Is that what you've been told?
It is, and that is a yes, but I still think you can take the stickers off. I mean, there's the thing out there about soaking it in water and then using a blow dryer, and that means any player could do it in any dugout, including Vandy's if they wanted to.
Yeah.
I have heard of stickers falling off at times this year. I mean, something's going on. Either the bats are too hot out of the wrapper or the balls. And I will tell you this, and this series did not involve either of the teams that we're talking about today, Vandy or Tennessee, but this was another SEC series that happened last week. And I heard of there were 8 bats, and this is an SEC series, that failed the pre-series test. Flat spots were a big deal on some of the bats. PSI was a deal with another one, but I think here's the thing: you can still get them legal past the pre-series test, and if you got time to tamper with them either that day, which I think that would be a stretch, but I mean there would literally be nothing to prevent a team, and I'm not saying this goes on, but let's say my life depends on it, and I need to win a couple of baseball games. You do the Friday night thing, you're probably going to be playing with legal bats there. And again, I think seeing some of the scores you're seeing in game ones makes me think there's just a problem with the bats, even within regulation as it is, that they're hitting the ball too hard. But if you throw tampering on top of that, Chip, there's nothing to stop me if I'm a coach or player of taking a rolling machine or somebody knows how to shave bats with you. And then after the Friday night game, hey, here's my bat. Make it do that thing.
Yeah.
And then hitting with it Saturday and Sunday. I mean, the sticker's still on the bat at that point, and it's the same bat that got tested as legal. I just think when people want to cheat, they're always going to find a way, and I just still think there's too many loopholes. Now, what I've been told, they used to have some, and I don't understand this at all, so don't ask me any follow-up questions because I won't be able to answer them. They used to do something where bats were bar-coded, and I think this would have been, after the hot bat stuff around 2010, where they went to that, and that solved the issue too, where you couldn't get a tampered bat in the game, and that's what they need to do.
Yeah, and the other solution would be go to wood, which we know there's cost.
Right.
We've talked about that in the past. There's been talk about the Major League Baseball perhaps subsidizing wooden bats for colleges and making it so they can evaluate players better for their future. And there's been talk about that for years. But then what do you do on that? Do you just say it's a Division I? Are you going to, if is a Major League going to supplement Division II, junior colleges on down the line? That's a lot of money. But some in talking. Some teams here, Major League Baseball, friends of mine, that they would really like to do that. That would give them, rather than just judging on what a kid does on the college circuit using the BB core bats, they would see how they handle the wood. And of course, the offensive numbers will go down, and then you wonder with the crowd attendance, people like offense more than they like sitting around watching a 2-1 game or whatever. So there's some discussion out there, and you just wonder if eventually one day the game will go to wood. That's a possibility. I wouldn't say that it's impossible. Maybe not in the next year or two, but I think on down the line there'll be a push for that eventually for the game to go to wood.
Yeah, and I hope they do. Of course, then you can still cork a bat or pine tar or whatever. but it's right. You're not going to see college players hitting balls 470 and 500 like you're seeing now.
Right. Yeah.
With wood bats. Yeah. So. All right, this is the question of the mailbag. This is the best one here. Baseball Bros. I didn't know this. How did you get the nickname Chip, as I see your first name is Gerald? Usually there's a good story behind a nickname and how it sticks to you for much of your life. I did not know you were a Gerald.
I am absolutely a Gerald. In the 1970s, in the early 70s and the 60s, from what I'm told, I wasn't born. I was born in 1968. But Chip is a nickname when you're a chip off the old block. You're just like your old man. You're a junior. So Chip was my full name is Gerald, and I'm the junior. My father, he played basketball at Vanderbilt in the 50s. So he was, Gerald Fridrich, and I'm the junior. And so not to have two Geralds in the house, they just named me my nickname, which is Chip. It's not on my birth certificate. So Chip was a name in the 70s that if you were the junior. It was like Trey, if you're the third, Trey, Trip. Some people you call people, hey, junior. They just call them junior, but I am a junior. I'm the second, but Chip is just a nickname to differentiate that you're a chip off the old block, with the block being your dad, like you're just like your old dad. So, which is a compliment. Love my dad. And saying that I'm like him is I'll take that compliment, but that's how they did it. So you got a lot of Chip. I don't know a lot of old Chips. Like I don't think there are many, 80-year-old Chips in the nursing home. So it's definitely a 1960 to 75, 78. There were a lot of Chips, and I don't think you see them anymore at all. I have several friends who are Chip, but that's the origination. There you have.
Yeah, that's what I
now
figured.
You know the rest of the story.
Right. I've known other Chips, and the explanation was the same. So.
And are they all in their 40s and 50s?
I know at least one of them is probably in his 50s, maybe 60s by now.
Well,
Chip
not
Hoback
too many
would be
Chips
one I'm
around.
thinking of.
Yeah, right. So but that's the story about it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well,
so I'll be an 8-year-old Chip one day, maybe.
Let's hope. I feel like if we keep going, you're going to be 80 by the end of this show. I did not plan on this being an hour and a half, but.
Well, if someone's listening to this on their phone and they're driving to Memphis, you're halfway there.
Yeah. And God bless you if you got this far.
That's right.
All right, Chip. Real estate. Give us what we need to know before you leave.
Yeah, I'll just make this quick because it has been a long show, and for those listening. But Frederick and Clark Realty. Speaking of Gerald Fridrich, my dad, he started the company in 1957 after he played basketball at Vanderbilt, and so he started a real estate and insurance. That's what we do, our family insurance and real estate, and our real estate company, Frederick and Clark. We have 2 locations in Nashville and Brentwood. To help you with your real estate needs, you can check out our website at frederickandclark.com. Love to help you with any of your selling needs or buying needs. You really need a professional these days with the market and the conditions. It's still a varying market up and down, still somewhat of a seller's market, but it's complicated, complex, and you need an advocate on your side to help you out. And that's where we come to play. So give us a call. You can call me personally, and I'll hook you up with one of our agents or talk to you personally about the market and your specific needs. But again, 615-327-4800, and you can find us on the web at frederickandclark.com.
Chip, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next week.
All right, Chris. See you later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We thank our presenting sponsor, Jody Jones DDS. We thank our other sponsors, Sutherland and Belk and MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast, and that's how we make this work, please email me at chrisley70@gmail.com. We also ask that you subscribe to our website, Vandy-Sports.com. That is $99 a year. You get things there that you don't get here. And of course, please rate, review, and subscribe where you see our podcast. That helps us get noticed. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Vandy-Sports.com. Follow me at chrisley70. And finally, subscribe to our Vandy Sports YouTube channel as well. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast, which is part of the 440 Network. I'm your host, Chris Lee. We'll catch you with another episode coming very soon.